Today on LSE Share Talk, we're conducting an interview with Jeremy Martin, CEO and Director of Horizonte Minerals, which is dual listed, and ticker symbol on AIM is HZM. Hello, Jeremy, how are you?
Yeah, good afternoon. Good to talk to you.
Okay, Jeremy, the first thing I'd like to do really is just for our listeners that are not aware of or haven't spoken with yourself or listened to yourself before, is for you to just give us a little bit of background of yourself and your team.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a geologist. I got a degree from the Cambon School of Mines. I started off working in Peru. I worked in Ecuador, Dominican Republic, run a gold mine in Sweden, and then established Horizonte 6 years ago. The team around me, Chairman David Hall was head of Anglo Gold, running their South American operations. Owen Babington was global head of exploration for Anglo American, heavily involved in their Barro Alto nickel mine in Brazil. Alex Christopher is currently head of all projects and new business at Teck. Bill Fisher is chairman, or was chairman, of Aurelian, which was bought out by Kinross for $1.5 billion in Ecuador. Alan Walker was with Credit Suisse down in Sao Paulo and now working for UK Trade and Industry Inward Investments. So we've got a broad team with finance and extensive mining experience in South America.
Okay, you've got a very, very good team there for what would be described as a small cap. What attracted these individuals to your enterprise?
I think all of the group have worked together in some form over the last 20 years, so obviously are comfortable working on each other's projects. The other thing is the quality of the asset attracted especially Owen to the company. And everybody sees that this is a tier one asset and has the potential to go the distance.
Excellent. Okay, can you just give us all an overview of Horizonte and your world-class assets, etc., please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I set the company up 7 years ago. We're focused entirely in Brazil. We made a grassroots discovery in 2010, which was the Araguaia project. In 2011, we then acquired Teck's adjacent project, an all-share deal. Since then, we have taken that area through from an early stage discovery, scoping study, completed a pre-feasibility study and metallurgical test work, and actually produced nickel last year. And then in Q4 last year, we were able to acquire the Glencore Araguaia project, which is to the north of us and adjacent to our areas. And that was a game-changing transaction for us. The two projects combined have a global resource of around 200 million tonnes, and there's a high-grade core to it, which makes it one of the highest-grade nickel saprolite projects out there today. So it's a very exciting time for us, and we're now moving the combined asset forwards.
Okay, I mean, I've looked at your paperwork well, I've read several things regarding your company, and it looks like regarding most mining that's going on for nickel at the moment, you are below cost for the vast majority of them. What's the estimate at the moment for costs going forward?
Yeah, so obviously nickel today at $8,200 a tonne is at around a 15-year low. We are currently updating and producing a new pre-feasibility study on the combined project, so I can't give you exact numbers today. We aim to have that study out in the next 2 months. But our aim is that our C1 costs, i.e. our production costs, will be lower quartile globally. Our all-in costs will be at the bottom end or lower end of the cost curve in terms of what nickel price we can use. And it will be one of the lowest cost next generation nickel project. So we're quite excited where this is going. I will say that I think we're going to have a challenging year and into next year for nickel. So this is a 2 to 3 year story we're looking at here.
Yeah, exactly. Because on your details I've got here is $4.16 per pound is the estimated cost previously, and obviously going forward we're at the lower end of the scale, as you said, on a 17-year basis.
Absolutely, and that was obviously from a historic study, and we aim to be below that level. And I think it's interesting to point out that at today's price, around 80% of all nickel operations out there today are not making money at these levels. So it's not sustainable down at the current price point.
Okay, so clearly then over the next few years, the current oversupply should dwindle, and could this be the reason why you're saying this is the peak time to be getting mines ready for the growth curve to go up?
Absolutely. I think if you look back to the last few cycles, the actual value of assets has never been as compelling as it has today. To actually, I mean, I think it was highlighted by our acquisition of the Glencore project with $80 million,
Exactly. Yeah.
$80 million of spend, a historic book value of over 400 million, and we acquired it for $8 with $2 million up front in Horizonte equity. Now, we wouldn't have had that opportunity had nickel price been $20,000 a ton and it wasn't at a 15-year low in November last year. So it was absolutely the right time to acquire the project. We'd looked to acquire it for at least 18 months before that. And what I would say today is the company's actually in the strongest position it's ever been. We've got tier one assets, we've got funding. And I think looking at the nickel space, this year we may well see pricing sort of increase towards the end of the year. But if you look at the bank's forecasts out for the next 2 or 3 years, we're looking at sort of long-term, mid to long-term pricing anywhere between $15,000 to $17,000 a ton.
Yeah.
And what we want to be doing is moving our project through the milestones, completing a pre-feasibility, completing a feasibility, and actually starting construction while we're going into an upswing in nickel price so that we can start producing at that upper end nickel pricing rather than starting this at the top end of the market, paying exceptional costs for everything and then start producing on the downswing, which is not where we want to be.
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, we're at the situation now where I think I read that the consensus for 2016 was $12,500 per ton. So if we're going forward 2017-18 towards 17 a ton, and we get anywhere between those two figures, you'll be at a very low end of the cost, and also be far more profitable than many other companies. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we will be using in the study a very low nickel price in terms of peer group, and absolutely, we will be able to make money right at the bottom end of the cost curve when a lot of our peer group won't be able to continue in that environment. And that's what it's all about with nickel. You've got to be able to sit at the bottom end of the cost curve, so when you do get these spikes and these troughs, you're not losing money at the bottom. And I think it's interesting to note that at the beginning of last year, nickel was $17,000 a ton. The average for last year was 15, and it ends the year at 7,200.
Yeah, that's a sharp
and it is traditionally, and it is a very volatile cyclical metal.
Okay, I mean, has that been because of China and oversupply? Why has it been as volatile of late in the last 24 months? Why has it been as volatile as that?
I think it's been volatile beyond that, but principally it's a small marketplace, so changes follow through to pricing very quickly. And obviously, again, as you say, China is the main market for it. But essentially, it's a small marketplace, hence the volatility in pricing.
Okay. You finished the year with 2.7 million in cash, Jeremy. I mean, is that, in your thinking, going to be suitable and enough to get you guys through to 2017 and to the next stage before requiring any further funding?
So yeah, that cash position will fund the pre-feasibility and our work this year, and it will run us through to the end of next year. So effectively, we've got run time until the end of 2017. However, what I would say is that we want to keep putting the milestones down, and the next big milestone is the full feasibility study, and we will require funding for that. So that will be the focus at the latter part of this year. What I'm always aware of with these companies is that you have to maintain a robust treasury position. So we're cautiously advancing the project in a low cost basis, putting down the milestones, de-risking it, but equally keeping a very close eye on our treasury position. So it's a balance between the two.
No, that makes perfect sense, because obviously we've seen quite a few companies, behemoths as well, that have got themselves in quite a lot of difficulty regarding debt, and financing, etc. So to be able to have cash currently is a very, very strong position indeed. So going forward then, if you've got 2.7 in cash and you're going to feasibility, is there likelihood that the major shareholders, of which you've got some significant ones in the form of Henderson Global, Tech and Glencore, and also, Anglo-Pacific, are they likely to remain supportive of the progress you're making and add to their holdings, do you think?
I think if you look at we've got a good group of London institutions, as you've outlined. We've also got Tech, Canada's largest mining company, with 28%. Those groups have supported and maintained their position going forward. So I think they're, without obviously saying specifically yes, I think there is support there to ensure that this moves to the next stage. But equally, we are and will be looking for a strategic investor to come in and finance the feasibility study. So we are likely to see a change within that structure. But I think for people looking at it today, it is a strong cornerstone group of shareholders who have funded it to date.
Indeed, indeed. Can we just move back a little bit? Because I'm interested, because I've got a keen interest in tech. And I noticed that one of the things that you're using is the rotary kiln electric furnace as one of the processing for the ores. Can you tell investors that are not aware of that why you've chosen that technology, please?
Yeah, it's a good point that you've raised. Nickel laterites can be treated in a number of ways, but not all of them are amenable to all of the technologies that are out there. And we're lucky that our project is saprolite dominated, which means that we can use the rotary kiln electric furnace process. Now, the rotary kiln electric furnace process, RKEF, is a 60-year-old technology, so it's tried and tested. There are 20 operations outside China using it, and probably the same number in China. And there are 2 brand new operations in Brazil operated by Vale and Anglo American using this technology. Why is it so important? Because it's tried and tested, it's been banked, and it reduces the risk. There are a number of projects in the nickel space that are talking about using heap or tank leach, and these have not been commercially proven to the scale that we're talking. So we're extremely fortunate that this deposit is amenable to it. We actually produced nickel over a 10-day period last year. There's a nice video clip on our website. This is not just a laboratory scale test. This was full-scale commercial operation in a pilot campaign, and we produced high-grade commercial ferronickel. So a big de-risking step. If anybody's looking at an investment decision on a development project, does the process work? Is it proven? And in this case, yes to both of those.
Excellent. And you're also using hydropower as well, Jeremy?
Yeah, all of we're in the Pará state in northeastern Brazil. All of the power in this region is hydropower. So again, that's another. The RKEF process is energy intensive, so you do need to have low cost power. And again, that's because we're in the right part of Brazil here.
Okie dokie. So on that note, regarding the power and the hydropower, obviously I need to touch on the Samarco incident regarding the mine dam. Obviously that was Vale and BHP Bulletin. Has that had any impact on the mining environment or Horizonte in their goals going forward at all?
Yeah, I think obviously it was a tragic accident that happened.
Indeed.
I believe that's now being worked through. There was actually news out on it yesterday. Yes, it has had a knock-on effect throughout Brazil, principally with the permitting agencies. They've obviously gone back through all of their projects, and anybody that has a tailings dam has effectively had a greater degree of scrutiny placed on that structure. This just so happened to correspond to us applying for us being in the process of getting our preliminary environmental license. So one of the reasons it's taken us longer than we were hoping for is the Samarco dam failure, because that ensured that all of the environmental agencies went back, as I said, and revisited this situation. We're lucky we don't actually have a tailings dam, so we don't fall under that remit. But yes, it did cause a delay in terms of where we're going, and rightly so.
So therefore, there was a backlog of other companies that were impacted that knocked on with you getting your applications processed, etc. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Oh, right. Okie dokie. Right. So, given that you're in this particular cycle now, I've looked back through some details regarding similar mines, and I think you mentioned before that the last mine of that sort of stature that you've got now, or was taken, Conoco Resources went for quite a substantial price compared
Absolutely.
compared to the value that's assessed towards your company at the moment.
Absolutely, very, very good analogy, and one that we like to talk to. So, Conoco Resources is or was a Canadian junior. They had the Onça Puma project, which is 80 kilometres north of us, so we're in the same region. Very similar sized deposit, nickel project. Conoco advanced the project to feasibility study. They spent around $35 million on that work, and they were acquired in 2005 by Vale for $850 million. And that valued those pounds of nickel on the project at 23 or 25 cents, I think 23 cents per pound of nickel in the ground. That's now a producing mine, again using the RKEF process. So it's a very good analogy for us. Today we're trading at 1 cent a pound in the ground. We will be at the feasibility stage in the next 12 months. So when I say there's significant value built into this project going forwards, going from 1 cent even to 10 cent is massive value return for shareholders.
I would have to agree with that sentiment indeed.
Obviously, if we hit 23 cents, we've done even better.
Of course. So I'm thinking now regarding investors. Why has it been? Because it appears to me that Horizonte has been off the radar, even well, in spite of the major or game changer, as you call it, purchase from Glencore / Astrata last year. Why are you off the radar? What's happening?
Well, I think there's two things, and good question. I mean, what we're doing now is, having completed that transaction, we're repositioning the company in the marketplace. When we closed that transaction, which was Q4 last year, that was really in the middle of the final sell down in the mining space. I won't say the final, but
yes,
that was where we saw sort of prices come off mid-year, and then they took another serious sell down in Q4 and again in January. So we did the deal right in the middle of that sort of point where people were talking about, are some of these major companies going to survive? So I think it was very difficult to come out and telling the market how well we've got this deal, etc., when really the investor sentiment towards mining was absolutely at its low point last year. So what we're now saying is that we've got this deal done, the company's funded, it's actually in its strongest position since we've set the company up. Nickel is still at sort of a 14 to 15 year low. We expect nickel to improve later this year into next year. We've got some major milestones coming down. This is basically a sort of it's a new paradigm, resetting the story and telling people about it. And that Conoco model is a prime example of where the value sits in this.
No, that's a really good recap there. I'm also going to be asking you, Jeremy, if that's okay, about the current political climate in Brazil, because obviously lots being spoken about regarding Brazil and issues regarding the political gridlock, etc. How is that impacting on the mining sector, on your developments and your goals and milestones?
Yeah, very good question. Obviously, very timely as well. Let's talk about very quickly the key issues in Brazil at the moment, and then what it means for us. So obviously, last year, stepping back, obviously Brazil is a commodity-focused economy, so it's taken a massive economic hit in terms of the step down in commodities prices, number one. Then we had the Petrobras investigation, which has run through all levels of government and high-level society. We then obviously had Samarco in Q4, and now we've got a situation where the country is looking to impeach its president. So everything layered on top of each other makes for quite an interesting situation in Brazil at the moment. What does it mean for us? Well, actually, because of the devaluation in the real, it means that our dollar spend is going further, which is positive. Brazil is still a major commodities producer, so its business is usually in the commodities space. What we are seeing is that we are one of a limited group of active companies in Brazil And we're now actually getting fairly good attention from things like the Mines Department, the environmental agencies, the state governments, and any inward investment is actually getting a higher level profile than, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So I would say that from a project point of view, it's positive. From a financing point of view, obviously, it's going to be balanced. If the country does face impeachment with its president, it will mean probably a period of instability while things get stabilised. But overall, it's business as usual, and actually, it's probably easier to move forwards now than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, because we spoke at the beginning, at the top of this interview, about your team that you've got involved, and a significant amount of those have got South America experience, so they know how to navigate all of the, we'll call it red tape, going forward. So you sound fairly confident that going forward, you've got the team in place that can navigate all these different hurdles potentially.
Absolutely, and actually another thing that I didn't add to that is that 2 years or 3 years ago, it was very difficult to hire anybody at any level in Brazil in the mining space because it was just running flat out. Yeah. Now, with the reduction in activity and a number of companies having ceased activity in Brazil, there are a lot of very qualified people in the marketplace, and we are actually increasing our team at the Brazil level, and people are available to us today that wouldn't have been 2 or 3 years ago. So I talked to you just about the board, but equally we have a very strong in-country team, and it is all about relationships. It's all about seeing progress, and also you've got to show that the authorities that you are still moving forwards, and that's where we come into play as well. So it's not an easy place to operate, but we have all the right people in place to keep moving forwards.
No, that sounds very, very positive, Joe. Because obviously, what I always look at with companies is that if they're making investments in the country, the likelihood is long term that that country is going to reinvest in them and show more, use the word, love towards their leadership of their companies. If they're recruiting and still recruiting, even though there's lots of noise and chaos going on. So it should be a positive for your company going forward, do you think?
Absolutely. And for example, we're in the Para state, as I've said. The deputy governor is from the town where the project is. He's taken a very proactive position on the project, and it's now starting to get raised to a level where 2 or 3 years ago, it really didn't make any headlines at all in Brazil. And now, despite our size, we're actually getting quite a lot of press coverage. We're getting people approaching us, and people are very aware of what we're doing.
Okay, excellent. One thing I wanted to touch on, obviously, was the health concerns that's going on in Brazil at the moment regarding the Zika virus. And given that you're recruiting and you've got quite a lot of staff in Brazil, is that impacting at all on levels of absenteeism or attendance or health at all in the mining sector or with your team?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, safety is paramount. We had a full briefing and training session at the beginning of the year. This is obviously quite a fast-moving epidemic.
Yeah.
There are a number of side effects which have been reported. It hasn't yet conclusively been proved that if that's linked to Zika. I mean, dengue has always been a problem in Brazil, and we've been fully aware of that. And obviously, Zika is transferred from person to person in a similar manner. Everybody has the right training. Obviously, you can't completely ensure that people are not exposed to this, but we have the right training, the right preventative action, and then if anybody does report with this, we've got a good system of getting them to hospital, dealing with it, etc. So far, nobody's actually had a reported case anywhere around the project, but it's a moving goal, and it seems to be moving quickly. So it's something we have to monitor.
Okay, right. So let's go back to the main issue of what our investors and your investors are more concerned about. Then, I'm reading through all the paperwork that I've got in front of me, and you're geared up now for pre-feasibilities. I'm looking at it and seeing that as the main or the next catalyst for the company. Would that be right?
I think there's two catalysts.
Okay.
One, you're right, is the delivery of the updated pre-feasibility, and we're saying that will be out into the market mid-year. Yeah. And the second big step is the environmental license, a preliminary environmental license. That's another big de-risking step. So hopefully those two should flow in parallel with each other. We will have other news flow around that, and then obviously the next big step is moving into the feasibility study.
Okay, so just for a recap then, because we're going to finish off shortly. If we're looking at Horizonte as a explorer at the moment, yeah. Looking for the mines, got the assets there. what year would investors be looking forward to you becoming a miner with assets that you can say, this is what we've got as assets and this is what we've dug out of the ground and selling at this cost?
Well, we're saying with continuous funding, and that is the big unknown, because
Yeah,
obviously if we have another 2015, every year that we have a step back in the market, that's a year extra on the timeline. So
yeah,
let's say we're in steady state conditions as of now,
yeah,
we're funded, we could be producing nickel by 2018, and that would obviously be where first cash flows flow through. And you'll see the sorts of numbers that we're talking about in the pre-feasibility, but they are very significant numbers in terms of cash flow, profit, which would then link into dividend payments to shareholders.
Ah, you
Obviously,
mentioned, sorry, I need to interrupt you there, Jeremy. You mentioned the magic word of dividends, which very few miners do.
well, that would be. I think we would be fairly. Obviously, wouldn't be unique, but I mean that would be our objective. The positive cash flow on this operation would allow, if it all works and the price point is right, to pay a significant dividend. But I think there's two things. One is obviously long-term shareholding, which is that eventual goal, and to go from our 1 cent to 23, 25 cents.
Yeah.
But equally, each of these milestones, I mean, we talked about Kaneko, that reached that 23 cents price point at feasibility. So that was even before production, and we're going to be there fairly soon.
Yeah.
So I would say that if we see, if you track our share price, it's mapped the nickel price all the way down. So if we see a kick up in nickel price combined with the milestones that we're putting out, I think there's a re-rating in the short term. So from shareholders' point of view, I think there's a short-term potential re-rating, then there's a mid-term, and there's a long-term.
That sounds excellent to me, Jeremy. Obviously, the share price at the moment has been, as I said earlier, it's been, to use a term, ignored considering what you've done thus far. So, with that re-rating, we're looking at significantly it moving upwards. Would that enable you then to raise funds at a higher level? Would you consider that if we got a re-rating to four
Yeah,
pence?
absolutely. I mean, we're always conscious of dilution. I mean, the last thing that
Yeah.
I want to do is dilute existing shareholders.
Mhm.
It's always that catch-22. You've got to carry on developing. If you just sit there and go into skeleton mode, you're not adding any value to anybody. So it's a balance between minimizing dilution, advancing the project, and being creative on the funding side. So we always look at all of those options when we go to market. But yes, obviously, if we go from 1.8 to 2.8 or 3p, then that is a more advantageous position to raise money than being at the current level.
Excellent. I've covered all my questions that I wanted to ask you. Given what we've covered thus far, is there anything that you want to explore or be saying to potential investors that are looking for the short, medium, and long term in the sense of watching out for Horizonte Minerals and the progress that they're making?
I think it's been a good interview, and what I should say is that I believe we basically provide optionality for a leverage exposure to one of the next major nickel projects out there. As I say, we can offer that short, mid, long term uplift. And I think the sort of milestones and the sort of value we're talking about, if you look at what was paid for assets in the last few cycles, all of what we're talking about is achievable. It's just ensuring that we maintain the progress and that we maintain the funding, and we're confident we can do that.
Excellent. Jeremy, thank you ever so much for taking part in this interview with me at LSE Share Talk today. I look forward to speaking with you again in the future, hopefully, when you've got some more news for us, and especially regarding the feasibility phase that you've got to be talking about later this year.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you, and look forward to keeping you updated. Many thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy. Goodbye for now, chap.